Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to Architects of Acceleration. I'm your host, Philbert Shih. I'm the founder of Structure Research. In episode 1, we laid out why Applied Digital built from scratch in Ellendale, North Dakota. Episode 2 took us into the site as we discussed how a 100-megawatt AI-ready facility rose in record time. Today, for episode 3, we ask, how do you build with the town, not just in it? So how do you build with kind of the community? Talking more about the community and that process versus, our last few discussions about the infrastructure itself and the data center itself. So Applied Digital saw Ellendale as more than a location. Its leaders saw a chance to develop a strong community spirit, to partner with local government, and to leave, hopefully, long-term lasting benefits. You'll hear how public-private collaborations like the one in North Dakota can revitalize rural towns, tackling housing shortages, creating jobs, and supporting short-term and long-term economic growth. I'm joined on this session with two gentlemen here, Nick Phillips, who is the Executive Vice President of External Affairs at Applied Digital, and Jim Grueneich, who is the North Dakota State Representative. So we'll start with you, Jim. You spent your entire career, as I understand, in North Dakota. From your unique vantage point, why does Ellendale, North Dakota work for a project like this, just from a just a geographic, a climate, a location perspective?
Well, I think, one of the big factors, as you go west of Ellendale, we have a lot of wind generation and a lot of wind power. So, when you get in this particular area, we're not necessarily going to be a hub for manufacturing or those kind of things, but we have wind generation and a pretty fair amount of it that ships right into a substation just right outside of Ellendale, and there hasn't been a way to successfully use that or really put it to work for the community or for the state. So I think from that perspective, just the location of our wind, the location of the substation, and probably our business-friendly climate. As a state, I think we do a lot of different things to encourage people coming to us, and we want to make that a business-friendly environment, and also at a local level. I think that the community has really opened their arms. I think like anything, when you're in a small town, the first news of it, it wasn't anything to do with farming or ag, and that's really what we have. So, I think the whole computer part of it, I think, was, maybe had some skepticism, but that quickly turned to optimism. People within the community started seeing the opportunity.
And just a quick follow-up, just to provide a sense for, how much of that energy is, what kind of quantity are we looking at, or, how much of a pipeline of energy can, does the region, potentially be able to support huge projects like this?
Well, I think Nick would have to back me up on this, but I'm not sure that we're really, what Applied is doing out there is maybe making a dent in it. I think there's still an excess, beyond what they're using. And Nick, you could.
Yeah, within about 100 miles of Ellendale, there's about 2 gigawatts, so 2,000 megawatts of wind generation. So when the wind's really blowing, and North Dakota is certainly known for how windy it can get, there's about 2,000 megawatts, about 4 times what we're approved for use there. And so there's some transmission line projects that have been going on for years. There's one that was built from the south up to Ellendale, and now there's soon going to be one built from Ellendale going to the north. And that's to be able to pull power out of the area. And that's even with us existing.
Oh, no, that's very useful feedback. Sounds like, yeah, like I said, it's not even making a dent. I mean, that just gives a sense for how much energy is available, which is, a great fit for data centers. And, Nick, maybe kind of, on that topic, kind of lean into the climate, how that impacted, how that shaped kind of design and operations as you approach this project.
So for us, the cold is really great. If you want to take anything that's hot and make it colder, it's easier to do that in a cold climate. And one of the things that the computers and the GPU chips that are inside of the facility are really, really good at is turning electricity into heat. And so by being in a cold climate, we're able to use what we're calling free cooling, right? It's the ambient air cooling outside that allows us to be able to, operate more efficiently. So there's two impacts for that. One is on the very coldest hour of the coldest day, we're only using, on this very first building, we're only using about 5 megawatts for the pumps and the cooling system that's moving the fluid around the facility. Whereas on the hottest hour of the hottest day, we're using about 32 megawatts. So when it's cold out, we get to save a lot of money on electricity. The other thing that is a huge benefit for us is that because it is so much colder, we don't have to do what's called evaporative cooling. So we're not taking, millions of gallons of water per year and evaporating it inside of systems to make them colder. So if this facility were to operate, say, somewhere hot like Texas or Phoenix or somewhere like that, we would spend more money on electricity for running cooling equipment, and we'd almost certainly also be evaporating lots and lots of water. And so between the two of those things, it allows us to save money on that energy, and it also allows us to use less than one single household's worth of water at the facility. So it's a very, very small water usage footprint.
Very interesting. No, that's some great context and background for the project. I wanted to shift to talking about the kind of the community engagement and the plan of action that was developed before this project began. Maybe Nick, before, we'll start with you. Before breaking ground, we understand Applied Digital had, outreach to the community, had some listening sessions, some education and knowledge gathering. Kind of just walk us through kind of what that phase looked like.
Well, so one of our first contacts was Jim here, Representative Grueneich. And I mean, in fact, our first facility that we built in the area, I think between him and his mom, they probably recruited, a good percentage of our employees just by word of mouth, which is very, very helpful. So as we came in, we met with him. We met with the mayor, Don Flaherty. They're in Ellendale, and some others from the county. And we just, we wanted to get to know what the situation was. We're, as Jim mentioned earlier, we're not an ag business. We're not farming. We're not the same, kind of a business that's traditionally been in the area. And in order to run, we need some different things. We need employees with a bit of a different skill set. We need different services. When we have construction people there, which there's over 500 today, there's all sorts of food and gas needs, just at the gas station, and, all sorts of lodging needs, and you name it. And so early on, we tried to get a sense of what was available and what wasn't. And one of the things that's happened is a lot of the locals have filled in on the things that weren't there. Housing wasn't available in a big way. There's, a couple of hotels there in town, motels there in town, but not a lot of vacant apartments or houses. But a lot of folks were able to go out and either buy, things that were dilapidated and fix them up, or maybe they already owned them and they rehabilitated them. And now folks are renting those to people. When we first got there, there was one restaurant right in town, right off the main highway that goes through town. It closed a few months after we got there. I thought, I was a little nervous we were going to be in the restaurant business because we really just needed to feed folks. But now there's 4 restaurants. The Cenex gas station there was, the gas station's restroom wasn't that nice. There were some food options, but not a lot of food options. I think, frankly, the Cenex probably figured it out first. I went in there one day and there's a brand new bathroom, and they had completely rehabilitated the place, and there was a lot more food options. They sell a ton of pizza and donuts and drinks and, snacks and all sorts of things out of there all day, every day. If you go to that place, 6 to 7 in the morning, pretty much every day, there's a line out the door, not enough parking in the parking lot. So it was really, for us, it was just a matter of figuring out what does the community have or not, and where can we plug in. And the community has stepped up in a big way. A lot of folks have really, lent a hand. And then we've also, done the same. We've tried to fill in gaps wherever we can as well.
Jim, how did local leadership play a role? How did they join in this effort?
Well, Nick covered a lot of it, but I think local leadership really bought in, starting with the mayor. Nick referred back to, I think, probably the very first meeting, and now it's probably be 3 years in August, maybe. But we all met at what was then the ranch. Nick said we had one restaurant. We were down to about a half a restaurant because they were on the verge of, closing. So, there was some real concerns as a community as how are we going to handle it? But I think, from local leadership, whether that be city or county, whether that be our EDA, there was a lot of people that really stepped up, and kind of embraced the opportunity. And I think that it kind of had a snowball effect. It just kind of kept rolling. And as Nick probably, or as he brought up, as you drove around Ellendale, I don't want to say we were a dying town, but, we certainly weren't a thriving town either. And now, again, local leaders, different things like that, community leaders, Ellendale really looks good. I mean, there was houses that hadn't been touched or maintained for years. I think as long as I've lived here, I've never drove through town and probably been more proud of how a town looks. I mean, older houses that, again, weren't in great shape or have new siding and new roofs, cars, in the driveway. And I think anybody that knows from a small town, when you see bikes and trikes in a front yard, that's good for everything. That's good for the school. That's good for the grocery store. That's good for Main Street. It really has a positive. Applied has had a tremendous impact on Ellendale and probably its survival for the next, hopefully 50 years. But that can't be done without local leadership. Whether, again, I really want to kind of commend Don Flaherty because he's the mayor and it serves some other roles, but he's been super supportive, as well as city council and county commissioners.
Yeah, it's a great story. Just to touch on that just a little more, any other, I know both of you, talked about how it's benefited the community, the process of getting, that you went through. Any other benefits maybe from a business or infrastructure perspective, for the, or anything that we may have missed, in talking about the benefits?
I think for the benefit, and obviously, Phil, you're not from around here, but as you go south of town, you see 20 new homes under construction. There's, an apartment complex soon on its way. And I think just to kind of reiterate what Nick touched on, when you go to these businesses, whether it be Senex or whether it be Casey's or, whether it be the grocery store or just Main Street in Ellendale, we've never had, or it's been a lot of years since we've had this kind of economic activity. And again, from housing to hotels to restaurants to just small private businesses, I think you could ask any one of them, and they would say it's probably been a game changer for them, and the community. So there's just been a lot of, and Applied has really bought into, not technically bought in, but into the community. They've helped a lot of different businesses. They've been involved just with community outreach, and the transparency, I think, is what's probably made this transition so successful. With Martin being in town, I don't think there's a meeting that he misses. He's actively engaged in the community. But with that, the meetings are important, but it's the transparency that if you have a question, Martin's there, and if he doesn't have the answer, he'll find the answer. So I think that's been, transparency has been a big key to the success.
For a little detail there, Martin is our director of community operations, and he lives there in Ellendale. We relocated him into town with his wife and his kid pretty early on in the project, and I think he's on the park board. He was just going to park board meetings, and they said, oh, well, we don't really have a meeting today because we don't have a quorum. It'd be really nice if we had this one more person on the board, and now I think he's on it. So there's just a lot of things that he gets to plug into, and we go out of our way to try to be involved.
Well, I wanted to maybe shift to talking about some of the challenges. I know kind of the availability, small rural places. Obviously, populations are smaller. Talent scarcity can be an issue. Maybe talk a little about that, Nick, and any other kind of challenges that you came across.
So Ellendale is a town of 1,100 people. It's pretty small. I think, Jim, maybe you know this better than anybody. I think 20 years ago it was probably about 2,000, 1,800 people or so. So it's been shrinking. There's been a shortage of housing and employees, and so here comes Applied Digital, and we say, hey, we're going to build this facility, and we need 350 or so employees. Well, there aren't 350 employees to hire, certainly. Our first project in town, we only needed 30 employees, and there weren't 30 really to hire. And we were able to recruit some folks to move back. Jim brought somebody back from Colorado, for example. So attracting employees is very important for us. We would really like to have 100 of the 300 employees live there in town in Ellendale. But, if you say, well, some of them will have a spouse or a kid or two or three or something like that, 100 new people in a town of 100 workers from Applied Digital might be 300 or 400, new total people. So it's a big deal. We're lucky in that the city had some lots already platted and identified. Jim mentioned earlier that there's 20 houses being built at the south end of town. There's the apartment building. So housing has been a big challenge. Daycare. I think if you look at any rural, community anywhere, childcare is just a big problem. There's no public childcares. There's some home childcares in Ellendale. There have been, but they've all been full. And so we've been working with some folks with the JDA, the Economic Development Group. They're in town to try to figure out how can we get a childcare, put into place, because, as we recruit folks, some of them are going to need, childcare as well as others. There's, really quality of life issues are a big deal for us. We're asking people to move to Ellendale. Many of these people are living in other areas that are maybe bigger than there. And so making sure that there's adequate medical, that people understand where that is, that there's childcare, there's entertainment. We're doing family movie nights. We helped get the bowling alley, rebuilt. Basically, it's got a really nice bowling alley with newly finished lanes and a new pin setter. Other people in the community came in too. So what I kind of say about it is just there are challenges, but the great thing is that the locals have really stepped up. I mentioned the bowling alley a moment ago, and the way that happened is I called Kyle, who's also the airport manager. We're also lucky there's an airport there. It's a very small one. There's no commercial flights or anything. But I called him one day and said, hey, I want to run a competition. We're going to challenge, the county employees and the rural telephone, employees to a competition. And he said, please don't do that. The pin setter breaks all the time. But he actually went out and took out a loan to redo it. He did that on his own, which is incredible. And then came back to us and we told him we'd like to see some other locals participate. And I think 5 or 6 of us, helped to fund that, which is really great. And so while there's challenges, it's a small town, but there's a lot of real benefits where people have stepped up. I mean, even looking back at the population was bigger a couple of decades ago. The sewer system can accommodate, 1,800 people is what the city engineer is saying. And that's a huge relief, because if we successfully attract 300 or so people, the employees plus their families to live in town, there's already a system that's there, right? So that doesn't need to be rebuilt. And so there's the city and the surrounding area has what I think is a great framework, and folks have really stepped up and have been very receptive. Yeah, there's challenges. I mentioned some of them, but it's been great to be able to work with folks to get through them.
Yeah, and Jim, from the local government side, how can it play a role in dealing with some of these challenges?
Well, and I think locally and as a state, we kind of partnered We're in the process. Well, and actually we got some funding for it through the state of North Dakota. There was a program out there. It was called Rails to Trails. So through, again, local leadership, community volunteers, community leaders, we kind of put together a plan, and it'll go in phases because it's fairly expensive, but we'll be breaking ground and getting a walking trail established, in Ellendale on the old rail bed. Two sessions ago, I got Burlington Northern to sell us the land very reasonably, and so that was the first step. But then phase two of it happened, this session, and it does probably one of two things. It makes the community safer because there's more traffic than what there has been in the past, but it also is a great opportunity for families and entertainment, whether it be biking or walking. So I think that's going to be just a huge asset to the community and to the employees, and pretty appealing. As somebody that's looking at the community, saying, what are we going to do? If we move here, and I think that's going to be one of the bigger features.
Yeah, no, I've really enjoyed some of the color and the perspective. I think maybe our audience would just, I thought I'd close with just kind of maybe sharing a few stats or data points, that kind of capture what's happened through this process and the interaction between business and the community.
I kind of talked about the population a little bit. I'll just recap. The town is about 1,100 people. We have over 500 construction workers on site. We think about 300 of them are living down in Aberdeen, which is about 40 minutes to the south. But that means there's a lot more traffic. There's a lot more things going on. Jim mentioned as well. The project itself is pretty much, well, it is the largest single site investment that's happened in state history, and it's about $5 billion for the whole campus, with about 2.2 million square feet of commercial space. It's really a big thing, and you can't really quantify what we were talking about earlier, but just folks have been very welcoming and understanding. There's some bumps along the way. There certainly are. But I think by and large, it's gone really, really well. And doing a large project anywhere is complex. But I think it says a lot about the community to just show, pretty much this has gone really smoothly, considering how large of a project it is. And, again, 500 construction workers, that's a pretty big population in a town of this size. So it's been really great.
And I think, just to jump on that, you can somewhat quantify it, because I believe it's around 18 or 20%, just an increase in sales tax. Property values have jumped significantly. So I mean, people that were in a house that think, what am I going to do? There's a value there for it now. So I think some of those things, whether that's how you want to quantify them, but just in property tax revenue, what applied will generate in property tax revenue. And people forget about that in rural North Dakota, small communities, is that without new business, you're always pulling from the same pool. So when people talk about property tax, or they talk about road improvements, they're hesitant, because it's that same core of 1,100 people that are footing the whole bill. And so when you bring a company like Applied Digital here, and you add their revenue to our existing rolls, that's brand new money. People talk about property tax relief. Well, this is the greatest amount of property tax relief you'll ever see, because it is fresh money and new money, and it's really relieving the burden off the people that live within the city, and how it touches. So, there are ways to quantify, without being too, specific, how it impacts the small community.
Yeah, on the property tax side of things, we actually asked to be annexed into the city. We did that a few months ago, and the taxable property base for the city of Ellendale was $75 million total before we got there, and we'll be, just with the first building, I think we're at about 129 million or something like that. So it's a pretty big increase, and one of the outcomes, to Jim's point, we think that the city probably has to reduce their tax rate in order to balance their budget because it just doesn't work otherwise, which is a really interesting problem to have, to say, hey, we're going to have to give everybody a tax break because the city's going to end up with too much. But they'll still be able to do some of the things that they've been wanting to do in terms of, hiring another police officer or doing some improvements and whatnot in town.
No, great. Those are amazing data points to kind of.
Yeah, I didn't want to get into some of that revenue stuff, Nick. I thought that was kind of your wheelhouse, but just to emphasize, anytime you get new money, that's property tax relief or tax relief for every current citizen.
Great. Well, appreciate the feedback and the conversation. Hope the audience got something out of that. Lots of definitely, I think a lot of tidbits and takeaways from that. But from listening to the sessions to housing solutions, I think today's conversation showed what it really means to build within a town, not just in it. So in our next episode, we'll step inside day-to-day operations with Applied Digital COO Laura Lartrello. We'll explore what it really takes to run an AI-optimized data center at scale, safely, efficiently, and sustainably. Thanks again for joining us. If you'd like to connect, head to applieddigital.com or find Applied Digital on LinkedIn. We'll see you for episode 4.